Professor Vipin Narang is here. And David Lee, are you out there? Would you please
Yes, I'm here.
please introduce Professor Narang.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the honor of introducing Professor Vipin Narang. Professor Narang is the Frank Stanton Professor of Nuclear Security and Political Science and member of the Security Studies program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. From March 2022 through August 2024, Professor Narang served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and then Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. For his service, he was awarded the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service. Professor Narang has been a fellow at Harvard University's Allen Institute for Strategic Studies, a pre-doctoral fellow at Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and a Stanton Junior Faculty Fellow at Stanford University's Center for International Security and Cooperation. Professor Narang received his PhD from the Department of Government, Harvard University in 2010. He holds a BS and MS in Chemical Engineering with distinction from Stanford University and a MPhil with distinction in International Relations from Balliol College, Oxford University, where he studied on a Marshall Scholarship. Please welcome Vipin Narang.
Thank you. Thank you. In fact, David Lee is one of our interns and who is a licensed lawyer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Oh, nice.
Sure, very nice. Now, Vipin is all yours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure sort of where you want this to go, but what I thought we talk about, sort of my time at the Department of Defense and, my previous work focused a lot on North Korea's growing nuclear weapons program. I think on a percentage basis, North Korea's strategic programs are advancing at one of the highest rates in the world, matched perhaps only by China on a percentage basis. And it continues to expand and diversify its capabilities. And that was sort of what we inherited when I was appointed into the Biden administration Department of Defense in March 22, right on the heels of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which sort of pivoted the attention, obviously, to Europe. But the first Trump administration failed to slow down North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Since the Hanoi summit, there's really been no substantive contact between North Korea and the United States government, despite what the Biden administration had publicly said that we'd be open to dialogue without preconditions, although the policy remained complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. There was no interest from North Korea. In the meantime, the North Korean program continued to diversify and expand, new ICBMs, new short-range capabilities, and we saw growing evidence of collaboration between North Korea and especially Russia, but also China. So you saw growing cooperation, collaboration, collusion. Obviously, the most visible example of this was North Korea sending 10,000 soldiers to the front in Ukraine in exchange for what we have to assume is material and diplomatic support for North Korea. And this is the security environment that South Korea, was facing. And when President Yoon, and I would love to have a conversation with this audience about sort of South Korean domestic politics and its implications for extended deterrence. President Yoon came into office inheriting one of the most, I would say, acute security environments in the world, bordering a nuclear state that showed no signs of slowing down and indeed showed every indication that it was going to continue to expand and diversify its arsenal. And South Korea and Japan were both U.S. formal allies implicated by North Korea's expanding arsenal and threats. And so the discussion about within South Korea's government about how to respond to North Korea I think reached a fever pitch when there started being discussions about whether South Korea needed to develop an indigenous nuclear weapons capability. Now, the U.S. position has always been that it is both better for U.S. security, it is both better for allied security, and is better for global security for our formal allies who are ensconced within our extended nuclear deterrent umbrella to continue to do so. And I appreciate the credibility of the extended nuclear umbrella that we extend to our formal allies. NATO, with 31 allies to whom we extend deterrence, and then formally in the Indo-Pacific, at least South Korea, Japan, and Australia. And that sort of birthed the Washington Declaration. I think everybody here is familiar with the Washington Declaration. I worked very closely on and very intensively on what ended up being, some of the language in the Washington Declaration about sort of accepting first the creation of the Nuclear Consultative Group, the NCG. That was something we kicked off in April 2023. In my time, I led 3 meetings, or in collaboration with the White House for the first meeting, and then afterwards, the Department of Defense took lead of the NCG. So I had the privilege of leading 3 NCG meetings. The 4th one was supposed to be last month, but I think had to be rescheduled, and I think it's imminent before inauguration if all goes well. And this was a real elevation in our extended deterrence relationship with South Korea. Previously, or prior to the NCG, we had what was known as the DSC. I'm sure many are familiar here with this. I saw the former ROC DAT on the line. I think K2 is somewhere on here. He sat through some of the DSCs also. The DSC was the Deterrence and Strategy Committee, embedded within a dialogue every year or every 6 months. The KID, and that has been has appeared frequently in joint statements between the ROC and the U.S. But the KID was a Korea Integrated Defense Dialogue, and the Deterrence and Strategy Committee was one subset of this one-day dialogue. So we spent 2 hours on extended nuclear deterrence in the Deterrence and Strategy Committee, and that was really created in 2013. It was fine for a 2013 world, but it was no longer suited, I believe, for a 2023 or 2024 or now 2025 world. And so there was a real need to elevate our extended deterrence relationship with South Korea, and that meant sort of, and that the idea of the NCG arose from sort of the model that we had from the work I did at NATO, where I had the privilege of leading and chairing the high level group, which is the primary advisory committee to the nuclear planning group of defense ministers. And we have a similar dialogue with Japan called the Extended Deterrence Dialogue. And so the NCG was really modeled actually on and I don't want to push the analogy too far because we're not trying to create a NATO-like structure with the ROC, but it was modeled in terms of the work streams that we had at the HLG. There was always progress. We identified work streams at the beginning of the quote unquote season in October, and then we had a deadline and deliverables by June of the following year when the NPG would typically meet. And so we had to make progress on posture, on planning, on sort of raising and refreshing our nuclear IQ, as we said in NATO. And so we ported over and tailored that model that we would have substantive work streams that made the extended deterrence relationship real between the ROC and the United States. And that meant having detailed discussions about posture, improving security procedures between us and within South Korea, and giving insight into how we think about nuclear planning. And that meant tabletop exercises. It meant scenario-based discussions. We had an immersion course that we kicked off for South Korean government officials, and we were going to hold ourselves accountable. We set a deadline for what we'd accomplish in 1 year, and I was very proud of the fact that at least in the first year we hit our goals, made substantial progress on over a dozen work streams. And very publicly, we signed the guidelines document that institutionalized the NCG as a way to manage the extended deterrence relationship between the U.S. And South Korea, and that was sort of led by the Department of Defense and the Ministry of National Defense in South Korea, and it was a real upgrade in our extended deterrence relationship. Now, in exchange for the NCG, which is both good for us and good for South Korea, the Yoon government very publicly agreed to reaffirm its commitment to abide by its non-proliferation commitments. And it's no secret. I've said this before. I think extended deterrence is not only in our security and allied security; it's also the greatest non-proliferation tool in the U.S. arsenal. And it would especially be dangerous to the NPT if a country like South Korea or Japan or Saudi Arabia acquired nuclear weapons in violation of its non-proliferation obligations. I think the NPT sort of survived DPRK because DPRK's sort of entry and then withdrawal from the NPT, was sort of a quick in and out. And Iran has been priced in now over about 2 decades. I think the concern from a non-proliferation perspective is that the next state to acquire nuclear weapons will, by definition, be a state that was in good standing in the NPT and had ratified the NPT for over 30 years. And it is unclear to me how much damage the NPT can withstand after North Korea, after Iran. And if it is a U.S. ally, that is you hear some in the commentariat, some academics, Daryl Press has publicly said this, Bridge Colby, who's the nominee to be the Undersecretary for Policy and a good friend of mine, have made the argument that maybe South Korea should get its own nuclear weapons. And we can debate the security logic of that. I still believe that it is in South Korea's interest to ensconce itself in the extended nuclear deterrent umbrella, because it's not as if South Korea can get nuclear weapons overnight. There will be a window of vulnerability against a nuclear North Korea that will have an incentive to try and stop South Korea, potentially through the use of force. And in a world in which South Korea is pursuing its own nuclear weapons, then the U.S. has no obligation, and probably doesn't have an obligation to defend it if it's pursuing nuclear weapons. And South Korea may be very vulnerable in that period. So, I think South Korea is better off in the U.S. extended deterrence umbrella and very publicly saying that it's confident in the credibility of our extended deterrent, rather than getting its own nuclear weapons. I think it'll be vulnerable if it tried to pursue nuclear weapons for a set period of time. No state has been able to acquire nuclear weapons quicker than about 5 years. And that's a long time for North Korea or China, who would probably oppose South Korean proliferation as well, to try and stop South Korea. Moreover, whether the U.S. imposed sanctions because South Korea is in violation of the NPT or not, other states potentially would. And South Korea's vaunted export economy would potentially face a significant hit. But a secondary argument is it's not just about South Korea. It's the damage to the NPT and the non-proliferation regime if South Korea were to pursue and acquire nuclear weapons that would follow, which I think would also be detrimental to South Korea's security, because you would have a cascade of potential proliferation in the region and the world if South Korea were the first one out of the gate. And so the Biden administration position was that we doubled down on the extended deterrence relationship. We created and birthed a new vehicle, which was a real upgrade. And unlike the HLG and NATO, which I did 10 HLGs over 3 years. At 31, the collective action problem is significantly challenging. The advantage we have in the Iraq relationship and the extended deterrence relationship, it's a bilateral relationship, which means that you get all the benefits of having an augmented extended deterrence vehicle with the NCG without the complications of a massive collective action problem. I actually think there are opportunities for an extended deterrence vehicle of some sort that doesn't supplant the bilateral relationship. I think it is important that we have the bilateral relationships with Japan, South Korea, and Australia, but it would be, I think, beneficial to have everybody on the same page and have something at 4 or 3 that supplements and complements the bilateral extended deterrence vehicles we have with South Korea, Japan, and Australia in the Indo-Pacific. But that said, I think the bilateral NCG was a real upgrade. It's in South Korea's security interest. It's in our security interest. And we made a lot of progress. And I think a lot of it was classified. And but if you look at the statements and the press statements of the last 3 NCGs, and then hopefully the imminent 4th one in the next couple days or weeks, you will see that a lot of progress was made, and it gives the U.S. insight in South Korea's conventional strategic capabilities, and it gives the South Korean government insight into how we think about nuclear planning, how we think about conventional nuclear integration, and all of the sort of meat on the bones we need to make the extended deterrence relationship real as what we said, equal partners, right? I mean, although they're U.S. nuclear weapons, and that won't change. The idea that we do extend and provide extended deterrence with partners on an equal footing, I think is really important, and we've taken that seriously in NATO, and we took it seriously in the Indo-Pacific. And so that's where we were when I left and where we are now. Now, obviously, domestic politics in both the U.S. and in South Korea are complicating factors. I don't know how the domestic political turmoil in South Korea, and I'd be curious to have a discussion about those who are more expert in South Korean domestic politics, what the churn and turmoil in South Korean domestic politics means for the NCG. And for number one, number two, also for the former cries or calls for an independent South Korean nuclear weapons capability. How capable is South Korea pursuing nuclear weapons independently with this kind of domestic political turmoil? My guess is not very much, in which case that it is in South Korea's interest now to double down on the NCG. And on the flip side, it remains to be seen whether the Trump administration will continue to invest as heavily as the Biden administration did in the NCG. The advantage is the NCG, particularly if this 4th meeting is able to occur in the next couple of weeks, is institutionalized. The Department of Defense and the Ministry of National Defense at very deep levels are committed to the NCG. And the work streams that we've established mean that the NCG will at least persist, in my view, for the foreseeable future. I do think that the Trump administration will see that this is in American interest. It is a way to allow South Korea to contribute to the extended deterrence relationship in ways that I think the president will appreciate, in the sense that it is a good, quote unquote, bargain for the U.S. And so I'm hopeful that at least on the U.S. side that there will be some continuity. My bigger question is actually on the South Korean side. What happens with the domestic political changes that are imminent and forthcoming in South Korea, and the commitment to the NCG, given that President Yoon himself was so intimately involved with and personally involved with the NCG. So I'll stop there as in terms of opening remarks, but I'd be more than happy to take this in whatever direction people want to take it in.
Thank you very much, Vipin. That's a great presentation. William King, go ahead.
And please introduce yourself.
Yeah, William.
Yes, sir. How you doing? My name is William King, retired Army, 30 years doing the counter weapons of mass destruction, and working currently with Booz Allen,
Nice.
doing a similar thing across our government.
Thank you for your service.
Greatly appreciate your comments, and they were spot on. But here's what I'd offer is we have historically assessed North Korea as not having certain capability. And every time we publish that assessment, it's sort of like the big brother, little brother relationship. Little brother says, watch me.
Yep.
And then we see them demonstrate, particularly in this mission space, time and time again, we've underestimated them or assumed that they haven't. And the most recent one, as we said, that they really don't have a thermonuclear capability. We can question whether the last test was, broke that threshold or not. But aren't we sort of pushing them, encouraging them to continue to demonstrate more advanced capabilities, and thus further destabilizing the region and causing question to our credibility of our extended nuclear deterrence as a viable option?
It's a great point, and I actually took this to heart. So I'll say this: I basically told my team, stop. We will not question North Korea's capabilities anymore because it is counterproductive. Number one. Number two, they're good. And, I remember during the first Trump administration, during the missile sprint in 2017, 2018, 2019, there were the NGO community, or sort of the OSINT community, let's call it, kept saying, oh, we don't know if the reentry vehicle will work. Well, you know what? Even if it's 30% chance, are you willing to risk, sort of a U.S. city? I think sort of the conversation it sort of became surreal. They have nuclear weapons. They work. They have missiles. They work, both short range, and they can hold at risk regional targets on Penn, in Japan, Guam, Hawaii, and certainly CONUS. And I don't, from a deterrence perspective, right? My point when I was in government was there is no upside in trying to provoke them to doing a full-blown Juche bird. Remember, they used to call it the end-to-end test. And what Kim Jong-un's management of this program showed was that he was allowing his scientists to fail, and they were learning in the process, and they were getting pretty good at missile technology. And now they have this deep collaboration with Russia and China. You think Russia and China have not, given some hints as to how to get a reentry vehicle to work? I mean, very open source, like we do ablative reentry vehicles. Yeah, okay, maybe they can't do that, but they can also put just a steel plate on the damn thing, and it'll survive reentry. And there are brute force ways to do it that the Soviets used to do. And I don't think there was any upside in sort of questioning North Korea anymore. I think if you subtly notice, the Biden administration stopped, at least the administration stopped questioning the capabilities and or the sophistication of the capabilities. Our focus turned to, sort of, this is a growing threat. Our policy was still denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But as my former boss, Colin Call, said, the denuclearization is a journey. And as you're trying to get there, right, we're sort of maybe stuck in idle. You still have to manage the extended deterrence relationship with South Korea. So let's focus on what it takes to assure South Korea. And, one day I think, North Korea there may be some sort of deal. I don't know. But until that day, we need to ensure that we have a credible extended deterrence relationship with South Korea, and that South Korea is assured with it. And I will say that, so we did a lot, and it was, I think by the end, the South Korean government and President Yoon were starting to say all the right things about how assured they were. But we could have used a little bit more of that. The more that South Korean government questions the credibility of the extended deterrence, the more North Korea can wedge the relationship. And so there's some lessons there for both sides, which is, in order for it to be assuring, South Korea also has to project that it is assured. And, we did everything we could to assure South Korea and the South Korean government. And I think we ended up in a good place. But I do think it's important that Seoul remembers that it also has some agency in the level of assurance in terms of its public messaging.
Yeah.
But then,
and I don't know if you don't mind offering just one to redirect.
Please.
You correctly tied it to South Korea, but I'd say that same challenges with Japan. And similar to where we saw the destabilization with the Iran treaty and allowing them to do something, we saw Saudi Arabia, we saw Jordan, we saw others in the Middle East react the exact same way. So this is not just a matter of reassuring South Korea, but it's reassuring our allies and partners in both regions that extended deterrence is something that we're willing to fully back. It's not just something that we say, but it's actually something we're willing to do. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Thank you, William. Tong Kim, are you there? Tong Kim?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Professor Narang. It was a wonderful presentation, very detailed and expansive. Now, the reliability or credibility, of the extended deterrent depends on the credibility to North Korea. If they don't believe what the extended deterrent can do, there's no use for whatsoever. Now, there's a new situation in South Korea president knew of South Korea was going, one of his defense officials, Minister Defense, they had discussed and entertained the idea of provoking North Korea to use this vulnerability of North Korean responsibility or reaction to what might have, what could be create some maneuvering so that provide justification for President Yu to declare emergency decree. And this political application of what the North Koreans have been doing. Now, you have any comment on that?
I mean, no, I don't want to wade into the South Korean domestic politics. I have a lot of faith in sort of the South Korean public and democracy and the resilience of it. You know, I saw those reports, and you know, it's sort of, you know, that's sort of a what was the movie Wagging the Dog, right? So basically using an international or military crisis for domestic political purposes. I mean, I think that's dangerous, right? Obviously, you know, this is one of the arguments that is used by policymakers, you know, former policymakers or soon-to-be policymakers and academics about the extended deterrence relations. We don't want reckless allies. And, you know, the idea that there was even a possibility of, you know, intentionally trying to provoke North Korea into conflict, you know, is concerning. But again, I just have a lot of faith in South Korean democracy and the people to, you know, sort of come out of this on the other side in the right place. And, you know, I think that's all sort of being sorted out as we speak. But, you know, part of the extended deterrence relationship are responsible allies too. And for the most part, you know, I saw nothing but, you know, sort of, I never got the hint that South Korea wanted to start a conflict with North Korea. All of our discussions are about deterring North Korea and, you know, sort of the capabilities, the posture, the public messaging that we require to do that. And at least my counterparts were just absolutely fabulous on that count. And so I think, you know, when you get to the working level on both sides, and certainly, you know, call it mid-level, my level and my counterparts, the focus was, we were laser focused on making the extended deterrence relationship real to deter North Korean provocation by presenting a unified front that any aggression from North Korea would be met with an overwhelming response, and that any nuclear use, as we said, would be met with a swift and decisive end of the Kim regime. And that, I think, you know, we were able to achieve, and we were making a lot of progress in that regard.
Well, again, it's a very scary if South Korea is pondering to provoke North Korea to take advantage of its provocative maneuvering into South Korean politics. And North Koreans, although, I mean, South Korea they discussed sending drones and also attacking the original spot of their provocations and sending balloons, carrying trash down to
right. I was there when trash balloons were coming in it was June of 23. Yeah. 24, just a couple months ago. Yeah. One landed right on top of the Japanese embassy, I believe.
Yeah. So
Very good. Yeah.
I think about the denuclearization goal, I think NPT and all the stuff that they usually explained are still appropriate. And I mean, there's no way for South Korea to go nuclear by itself. They're going to have more lose than to gain, in my personal view. And,
I agree with that. Yeah. That was the theory of our case, essentially, that, you know, and I think the NCG is independent political party on both sides, right? And I hope that it persists on the fundamental basis that it's good for South Korean security and it's good for U.S. security. Bottom line, it's independent political party.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chung-Soo, go ahead.
Professor Narang, thank you. I know that Mr. Anthony Blinken is in South Korea. I don't know whether he left yet. To the extent that you can tell us, do you know why he's there and what is he?
I have no
saying
idea.
to the-
No, I left 3 months ago, and when you leave the U.S. government, first of all, you no longer speak for the U.S. government. I want to make it clear I speak for myself, not the U.S. government. But also, nobody tells you anything anymore. I have no idea. No
Okay.
idea. Yeah. I think this is. I wouldn't read too much into. I think so. Jake Sullivan was just in India. Anthony Blinken, Secretary Blinken is in the Indo-Pacific. I think at the end of the administration, it is appropriate, and I think a really nice gesture for our senior principals, our Secretary of State, and our National Security Advisor, to go to our closest allies and partners, say thank you, which is what I think they're doing, and sort of reaffirming the progress we made over the last 4 years, and ending the administration on a good note with our allies, because this administration, and this is where I don't think anyone would disagree with me for those that are currently in government, but when I was in government, one of the things we took pride in was reinvigorating our alliance relationships on the theory that the allies are force multipliers for the U.S. It is this notion that allies are liabilities or free riders is simply not true. When we provide a united front to our adversaries, we are stronger. And the allies provide capability, geography, we share values, and they're force multipliers for U.S. security. And I think the tour in the last couple of weeks is a reaffirmation of that. And hopefully, there will be differences in style between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. But I think, it's important for our allies to remember, how much the Biden administration invested in the alliances. And I think that if I were to predict, I think that's sort of what the purpose of these trips in the last couple of weeks are.
Thank you, Vipin. Nobuo Tanaka. Nobuo, go ahead.
Thank you. I cannot agree more. I'm a former executive director of the International Energy Agency, IEA, in Paris. I'm not a nuclear expert, but I'm promoting these days about the triangular collaboration between US, Japan, and Korea on developing a nuclear, the peaceful use of the nuclear capability. And one is the building, just like AUKUS, the Northeast Asian AUKUS, I call it JCAS, to build the nuclear propulsion submarine, not the weapon, but the submarine, to deploy Tomahawk in case, and kind of promoting some kind of assistance or addition to the deterrence by the U.S. Nuclear arsenals. Another one, which I really want your comment, is that I promote developing jointly the pyroprocessing. It's a reprocessing developed by the Algon National Laboratory together with metal fuel fast reactor called integral fast reactor. And Korea made a, joint research with Idaho National Laboratory to get this technology as a proliferation registered one. But US still does not allow Korea to do it domestically in Korea, to develop this pyro processing, which means using plutonium and reducing waste for the Korean peaceful use of the nuclear power.
Yeah.
I think the current geopolitical situation of North Korea, I think there's not much risk of, transporting some of the technologies of pyroprocessing to North, because they have already plutonium bomb. So I think to strengthen the collaboration between triangular use of this technology, pyroprocessing, I think United States should change the mindset of allowing South Korea, to do this technology domestically. Do you agree with me? This is a very important time for Japan. The purpose for me to use this pyro is to help the Fukushima situation, to separate the plutonium from the debris and reduce the waste in Fukushima from debris. So I need the triangular collaboration of Japan, US, and Korea to help Fukushima situation. So this shows the very good, let's say, promotion of the peaceful use of the nuclear and solving the devastating accident in Fukushima. So I really want the U.S. change the diplomatic issues about using pyroprocessing in Korea.
So this is out of my lane, and I want to be very careful here because I had colleagues of mine that worked these issues on civil nuclear cooperation with South Korea. Look, we worked hard on trilat cooperation, and those were very public. The president held the Camp David summit. Our secretary and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan held trilateral meetings, Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. I also am concerned sort of because President Yoon invested so much in that effort, what the future of that is in South Korea. The idea of, sort of a JACAS had been floated before. Look, the reality is AUKUS is going to be hard enough because our defense industrial base and our sub-industrial base is already stretched. No matter what, we can get into sort of the alliance politics and this and that. The reality is we don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to add anything else on the SSN line for ourselves or for allies. And so just realistically, it's probably not a door that we can push on at the moment until the submarine industrial base is really set up in the UK, Australia, and the US in a way that has built some slack in the system. Remember, we're also going through the Columbia SSBN build at the same time. And if we have to buy additional Columbia class boats, I said this right before I left government, and this is my personal capacity, we're going to probably need more Columbias too. So we just don't have the capacity for anything else. And on the pyro processing, I'm going to punt on that question just, out of, taking the excuse. It really wasn't my lane, but my understanding is there's a lot of, especially when there were calls for an independent South Korean nuclear weapons program, it's politically difficult to greenlight a reprocessing technology that might hint of essentially winking and nodding for a South Korean fissile material production pathway for nuclear weapons. But that's my personal opinion. I'm not sure sort of where this landed up with the Department of Energy, State Department, and the White House. But, I think to your broader point, trilateral cooperation is really important. We need to sustain it, and we need to find opportunities. Real-time missile data sharing, that's great. I think we can do more in space cooperation. I had the space portfolio. I think there's a real opportunity for South Korea to get in the space game. Japan is excellent in the space game. South Korea has some opportunities there. And I do think on extended nuclear deterrence, we can have discussions at 3. I think, the South Koreans are willing to have those discussions. I think the Japanese government is slowly getting there. And I think, the coming months and coming years, I think will be very indicative about what the appetite for trilateral cooperation on strategic issues is. But I think there is an appetite. I think there's real opportunity. And I think, and I wouldn't necessarily stop at 3. I think bringing Australia in is really important because Australia is willing to play ball and they're an exquisite partner. And Japan and Australia have the overlapping threat picture with China, and Japan and South Korea have the overlapping threat picture with North Korea. And so Japan can sort of be the pivotal state in this kind of arrangement. And I think there's some real opportunities there. So we worked very hard and we went at the pace the market would bear. But I think that's a door we should keep pushing on.
Thank you, Vipin.
Thank you.
Song Sang-ho, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Song Sang-ho, a DC-based reporter of Yonhap.
Hi, Sang-ho. Yeah. Good to see you.
Yeah. You said North Korea's capabilities are advancing at one of the highest paces, but can you elaborate more on your assessment of North Korea's nuclear weapons capabilities? Do you think that North Korea's nuclear march has gone too far to persuade the North to roll back its nuclear program and demand complete denuclearization?
Good question. Look, I don't know, and I don't want to get into too many details here, but in terms of what I meant was, they're producing fissile material, right? And only China and only at the moment, China and North Korea are producing fissile material at the rates that they are. And so these are the two sort of fastest growing programs in the world. Pakistan may be a third, right? I mean, there are the U.S. we haven't really produced new pits. We're starting to, but we really haven't. Russia hasn't either. So, in terms, the UK, France, very low level, if any, certainly not the UK. And so that was all I meant by that point. But do I think that North Korea has gone too far? I don't think there's ever gone too far, right? It is possible that North Korea is just trying to build leverage. I think the Chinese too are just they are building leverage for a day when they'll join arms control talks. I am not an arms control pessimist, despite what my public persona. I'm on team deterrence. Don't get me wrong, but deterrence and arms control are mutually reinforcing. As a counterforce, somebody who spent a lot of time the last couple of years thinking about counterforce and U.S. strategy, arms control is my best friend, because it limits the number of systems the adversaries possess, and there's verification for what they are, how many there are, where they might be, and that's all great from a deterrence standpoint. That said, China is not going to come to the table until it believes it has leverage. North Korea is not going to come to the table until it believes it has leverage. But I do think when they think that they have leverage, they will try to come to the table. Our job is to make sure that they may think they have leverage, but they don't have it, right? We want to be in a position of strength when we get to the point for sort of armed discussions. Or you think about linkages where we have asymmetric leverage. And I don't think North Korea is going to do this indefinitely. I don't think Kim Jong-un wants to be a completely isolated pariah regime. That said, I think he's buying some time with this relationship with Russia and China, where maybe he doesn't need to come to the table just now. And so these are the kinds of developments we have to monitor. Again, the Biden administration, and I believe the Trump administration also, was open to dialogue without preconditions, but the goal remains denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The ultimate goal remains, that was U.S. policy.
Thank you very much. Ken Harada, go ahead, please. Ken?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This is Ken Harada from GG Press, Japanese news agency. So, Doctor, you briefly touched upon the trilateral cooperation or dialogue on extended deterrence among the US, ROK, and Japan. Could you a little bit elaborate on this? How, if it gets realized, what is going to look like and what they are going to talk about? And how is this trilateral dialogue, if it get realized, going to play a role or make an impact on not only North Korean unlawful weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile, but also China's rapid buildup of the nuclear arsenals? Thank you.
So what's the benefit of trilateral cooperation on extended terms? One, I want to be clear. Look, our position was, we have very robust bilateral vehicles with both Japan and South Korea. Those are not going anywhere. Those are our primary vehicles with each ROK and Japan. That said, what is the advantage of trilateral, at least overlays, so that we can get on the same page? One, there is no use of nuclear weapons in East Asia that does not implicate both Japan and South Korea, right? So having everybody, at least those three, on the same page is really important. Two, how would we respond? Well, we'd probably respond together, right? And we have the nuclear weapons. You guys have conventional assets, both you and South Korea. How do we coordinate the allocation and support of conventional capabilities and conventional support for U.S. nuclear operations between Japan and South Korea, right? So as we think about sort of U.S. nuclear planning for these contingencies, or conventional planning, because it doesn't have to be a nuclear response, and I want to be very clear, our policy is, we would, if North Korea used a nuclear weapon, we commit to ending the Kim regime. We don't specify how we're going to do it, maybe through nuclear weapons and maybe through conventional means. And either way, there will be significant conventional role for South Korea and Japan, and coordinating at 3, the actual coordination of what that'll look like is really important. And right now it's broken, right? We don't have it at 3. We have 2 bilats and then we figure it out. Essentially, if you think about at a very high level, right? It's US planners doing all of this then. So we get inputs, we do it, but then this link between South Korea and Japan is missing. We're not all on the same page. And the third thing is unified front. How do you augment deterrence against adversaries, whether it's China or North Korea? You present a unified front that they cannot wedge us. And the more it looks like we can't do things at 3 or 4, the more it looks like their wedge strategies are working. So my question, and I've got K2 on the line. I want K2 to talk because I see him right in front of me. The former ROC defense attaché in DC and my old friend. We talk about, sort of what is the downside to trying to have trilateral cooperation. History aside, when we talk about looking forward and not looking backwards, why would we not have an overlay on these 2 bilateral relationships that we have, 2 bilateral vehicles with getting a common operating picture, so to speak, of what, sort of how extended deterrence would work in practice in the event of Chinese or North Korean nuclear employment. So from my perspective, it was only upside. It was only better for our security if we could get discussions at 3. And I'm confident we'll get there. I think we made some progress in other areas that will pay benefits, to eventually doing this on extended deterrence. And I think it may be easier actually to do extended nuclear deterrence discussions at 4. So you get the Australians in too. That way, some of the domestic political opposition to doing it at 3 dissipates a little bit.
Thank you. Mason Rich, go ahead. Mason?
Hey, Mason.
Hi.
Mason, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi. Good morning and good evening to everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to preface this briefly by saying the most likely next president in South Korea is Lee Jae-myung. And so I don't think that, given the perspective of the progressive Minjutang party here, that we're likely to see the same type of discourse about South Korea wanting to develop nuclear weapons. But given that that's the case, and sort of given the theme of this event, I have sort of 3 interrelated questions. The first one is, what are the conditions under which South Korea could nuclearize with minimally adverse security and economic consequences? And then a sort of sub question of that is, what about not going that far, but simply aiming at nuclear latency?
Yeah.
What would the advantages and disadvantages of that be? And then thirdly, what kind of arsenal would South Korea ideally need, given the threats that it faces regionally from both North Korea and China, and I guess in some way or other Russia? Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good questions, Mason. Look, South Korea already has some latency as a spectrum, and it's already on the latency spectrum, right? It has a very sophisticated civil nuclear program. So it has, sort of the scientific and technical capability, if it needed and wanted to, right, to pursue nuclear weapons, with the caveat that nuclear weapons is a different technical beast, but not out of the reach of the South Koreans. So the question is sort of, how far could they go without getting detected? I mean, I think, given, and others here are going to be more expert on this than I will be, but I think it would be, at some point, cheaters, as cheaters approach the finish line, the red lights get louder and brighter. And so I'm sure any country could very quietly do things that have no visible signatures. You can do work. You can do theoretical work. This is basically what the Indians did in the 1970s and 80s when the scientists were told to never talk to the prime minister about nuclear weapons again. They all went and did their, equations of state work and, sort of what it would look like if they ever had the fissile material, right? I think where you start getting at risk of getting caught is when you actually start producing fissile material. So it's possible there are a lot of countries in the world that have done a lot of theoretical work already who have no intention of getting nuclear weapons, but scientists do what scientists do. It's entirely possible it's already happened in not just South Korea, but elsewhere. But I do think that if there is an effort to produce significant quantities, and I don't mean that in the IAEA sense of the word, but enough quantities of fissile materials to have, to your final question, an arsenal that is credible of independently deterring and defeating North Korea, which, given the pace of North Korea has a huge head start. I think, South Korea probably gets detected. And what does that do? It depends on, sort of, they would be in violation of the NPT. Congress in the U.S. can decide whether, that's typically meant to, that would typically trigger sanctions automatically. But because South Korea is a formal ally, depending on who's in the White House, I mean, the Reagan administration basically looked the other way with Pakistan in the 1980s. It's possible the U.S. looks the other way, but it's also possible that Europe does not. And that would still result in significant, I think, damage to the South Korean export economy. And so, I think South Korea is vulnerable in that period. Also, if it is discovered, North Korea is going to find out. And what North Korea does then, I think, is the big sort of wild card, right? Because that could actually, that could invite some sort of North Korean response that would at least attempt to cripple its South Korean nuclear weapons capability. So this is a long-winded way of saying that South Korea is already clearly on the latency spectrum. But there is a point at which, if you start developing fissile material at mass quantities to have the arsenal that South Korea would then need to actually deter and defeat North Korea in a nuclear war, it doesn't need ICBMs, right? So unlike North Korea, which needs ICBMs to hold the U.S. at risk, South Korea just needs a lot of short-range capabilities. In fact, it already has the delivery vehicles. The Hunmu, what is it? Hunmu 4, 2, 4, 4, K2's got it, 4, yeah. The Hunmu 4 for sure is already very sophisticated. It has a pretty big payload and throw weight. Like, you've got the delivery capabilities you need, but you need fissile material. And I think that's where the risk is. If you start getting caught diverting fissile material or producing fissile material for a nuclear weapons program, that's where all the questions about what the international reaction will be will come up. And then what does Japan do? The other big question.
Very good. Eugene Kim, go ahead. Eugene, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm a news correspondent for Gyeongyang Shinmun, a South Korean newspaper based in DC. And since you spearheaded the efforts to strengthen extended deterrence architecture, namely the
well, it was a big team. It was a big team.
Right, and trilateral security cooperation. I want to ask you, with Trump returning in less than 2 weeks, then there might be also a possible government change in Korea due to this martial law declaration. Do you think both RK and the US, they might build upon the achievements that you made? And on Korea's political situation, U.S. government was neither notified or consulted about President Yoon's illegitimate declaration of martial law, and Jake Sullivan mentioned that he saw it on the TV. So do you think it might have jeopardized U.S. Forces in Korea readiness on the Korean Peninsula and U.S.-RK relations? Thank you.
I don't know. I don't want to speculate on that. I mean, I don't think USFK is an extremely capable professional. I don't think anything jeopardizes their readiness. I mean, I don't know who knew what when. And, I think we all found out very early that morning the same way from Twitter and CNN. Look, on the broader question, again, I think there was a lot of faith in ROC democracy. I think ROC democracy showed itself within hours of the declaration to be very resilient, very dynamic and vibrant, and rock democracy will survive this, right? There was a lot of criticism. Oh, the Biden administration didn't get involved into this. We didn't have to. South Korean people took care of it themselves, and that's the way a mature democracy handles its business. And so, you know, I think the U.S. government did exactly the right thing. You stay out of it. And the South Korean public did, and the National Assembly did exactly what it needed to do. And it invalidated the martial law, and it's shown itself to be extremely resilient and strong. And that is the best outcome. And so I'm very confident South Korea will weather this. And when it comes to security policy, which I think is bipartisan in the US and in South Korea, a lot of the things that we worked on in the Biden administration were neither Democratic nor Republican. They were actually, a lot of the ideas came from previous Republican administrations. The idea of the NCG wasn't new. And there were Republicans on the Hill and former Republican officials who had, you know, similar ideas, but the time wasn't ripe for those ideas. We were lucky that the time was ripe in 2023, and we had President Biden and President Yoon and their combined vision for it, for the Washington Declaration, allowed it to sort of yield fruit. And that's why I think it'll persist. I think these are good policy ideas, and they're good for South Korea, and they're good for the U.S. And they are low cost ways to actually augment and elevate our extended deterrent. Pursuing independent nuclear weapons is a very high cost way for South Korea to achieve security. And so, you know, it is also important for the U.S. to get greater South Korean inputs into our extended deterrence relationship, given the evolution of the North Korean nuclear and conventional programs and other WMD programs. So that's why I think it's in all of our interests. And same thing with trilateral cooperation. It's in Japan's interest. It's in our interest. It's in South Korea's interest. And so where there's opportunity, I think every administration on any political stripe will take it, because these are, at the end of the day, neither Democratic nor Republican nor conservative nor progressive, ideas. They are just good ideas. And I think at the end of the day, the Trump administration, they're pragmatists, as the Biden administration was. And in these issue areas, I hope there will be a lot of continuity.
Thank you. Very good. Kyung-gu Lee. Go ahead, General.
Thank you, Vipin. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
very
Good to see you, K2. How are you doing, bud?
Yeah, very good. I'm K2, former defense attaché to Washington, D.C. At this time, I am, or my colleague in MND, they are very concerned about the domestic public opinion to get nuclear bomb. As you may be aware, our ordinary people desire to get nuclear bomb 60 or sometimes 70%. So even some politicians and scholars are urging that the South Korean government pursue nuclear bomb in case. So you illustrated about the possibility of a South Korean government to pursue nuclear bomb in your book, Seeking the Bomb. South Korea can go to the hiding instead of the hedging or other strategies. Do you have any idea or comment how to let the Korean people or older people know the negative side of the nuclear bomb? Because most of the people, they are believing that they are believing that to tend to believe the positive side of the nuclear bomb to deter North Korean nuclear weapon. Thank you.
Yeah, no, K2, I had to be more polite when I was in government, so I'm going to be very indelicate now, in my personal capacity. Stop throwing these public opinion polls at us. They don't mean shit. They mean nothing. No, these questions, when asked, are asked in the wrong way, without the full context, and without the cost, and without any realistic timeline, and what the risk of South Korea pursuing nuclear weapons would be, right? You go down the street, you ask 100 people, should we have nuclear weapons? They look around, they see North Korea's nuclear weapons, they see the US, say, yeah, why not? Most people have no idea the sophistication and or the complications, complexities of international politics, nuclear weapons programs, what you need, the fact that South Korea is a member of the NPT in good standing, and there could be consequences to its economy if it pursued nuclear weapons, if not from the US, from other partners with whom it trades and relies on for its economy, or that you can't get nuclear weapons overnight, that you have a big window of vulnerability and North Korea might attack you in the meantime. If you ask the question the right way, I bet you the percent that supports South Korean nuclear weapons in the public plummets to less than half that, 30%, because you're going to have 30% of people who are just wacko everywhere. What we found across the world, including in the US, no matter what question you ask, 30% of people will say yes to anything. There's wackos, 30% baseline wackos. So basically, you know, the 70% number that keeps getting thrown in our face, frankly, it was meaningless when it was thrown at us when I was in government. It's meaningless, I think, you know, in general. And so that is irrelevant to this discussion in a lot of ways, because when asked the right way, the number plummets. We know that. That's Victor Cha. His polling shows that it falls. But also, it is the ROC government's job to educate the public then about the risk of pursuing nuclear weapons. And we can do that in the immersion course with ROC government officials. We can explain to ROC government officials all we want what the risks are. At the end of the day, it's the ROC government's job, Seoul's job, to educate the people about what the risks are and why you're better off with the extended nuclear deterrent. Now, every time we made progress in the extended nuclear deterrence relationship, every time there were calls that it wasn't enough, or that 70% of the ROC public still wanted nuclear weapons, it undermined the credibility of the work we did and was damaging to the extended deterrence relationship. So I think it's important for Seoul to display satisfaction with the elevation and augmentation of the extended deterrence relationship, because all that's doing is making you less secure, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then if nothing is going to be good enough except your own nuclear weapons, then Seoul may have to try and get its own nuclear weapons and face the consequences and the potential risks and downsides of doing so. And then, you know, you could potentially face a very bad day. At least under the extended deterrence umbrella, you know, we have your back. And so, you know, the public polling grew old very quickly. Nobody believes the 70% number because the question is not asked right. When Victor Cha redid the poll and the number plummeted, you know, it showed. I think Toby Dalton and Carnegie also performed similar polling. And I think it's important, you know, to be very, very nuanced about the polling. When asked the right way, the number falls. And in general, like on these issues, you know, I felt and I believe that those in South Korea that want South Korea to have independent nuclear weapons uses that number to their own ends, because if they actually educated their public, that wouldn't be the real number.
Thank you very much, Vipin. Rich Butler, go ahead. Rich? Go ahead, Rich.
Vipin, it's good to see you again, sir.
All right.
Hey, Rich.
Great too as well. Hey, greetings from Carlisle Barracks, where I'm settling in as the director of the China Land Power Study Center.
Nice.
Yeah, it's been fun. Quick question. So, stepping out of theater myself, and then you stepping back to academia a little bit. You know, we've given a lot of thought over the last couple of years. You and I have had some good dialogues on how we understand each other's perspectives inside the alliance to sort of get to where you took us to with the team. Given the threat perceptions and how we are talking tonight, do you think we're spending enough time really considering what the KJU regime really wants in the future and why he's doing what he's doing, given stated intent, but also changing his constitutional policy and you know, proving, in my mind, whether he's a mearsheimer defensive realist or an offensive realist?
It's a good question, Rich. You tell me. I think this is the big black box, right? But when I look at KJU's behavior, again, it's very means and rational. I just don't know. The question we all had was, what are the ends, right? So he's developed this relationship with Russia. Russia may view it just as a transactional relationship, but what it's done for KJU is buy space from China. So dependent on China, now he's got an alternative, and wedging for Russia, China by this greater collaboration with Russia is a genius move for KJU. Just genius geopolitics, right? Because he's developing options and it can gain greater birth from Beijing in ways that were not available potentially before the Ukraine war, because Russia needs 10,000 soldiers and ammunition, and KJU has it. So he's been able to take advantage of the opportunities he has. And it's hard to know what the ends are, but we can't discount the possibility. I mean, we traded in worst case scenarios. Well, the worst case scenario is he'll see an opportunity before napping in South Korea and the US and take advantage of it. So we need to be prepared, right? That's why it's, ready, fight tonight, right? We might have to be ready at any particular moment because we don't know what he wants. We don't know what information he gets because of the pathologies of that type of regime. But he's displayed a remarkable ability to take advantage of opportunities. Singapore and Hanoi taking advantage of opportunities. And, I think all of that suggests that we're dealing with a very sophisticated adversary who has made the most of very limited resources and capabilities, who now has options between two major powers, Russia and China, is getting some sort of material support, I imagine, if not just diplomatic support from Russia. And so, to discount KJU would be a big mistake. And to think that, to the previous question, to think that you might have 5 years, of trying to pursue nuclear weapons without KJU doing something about it, I think is a very risky, sporty proposition. I don't know what the end goal is. I don't know if it's reunification. I think it's independence. But short of that, when I see the pattern of KJU's behavior, without getting into the black box, which I don't think anyone can, he's shown a remarkable ability to take advantage of both tactical and strategic opportunities when they present themselves. And that should, I think, sort of chill the spine a little bit, that, there's no room or time for the alliance to go complacent, if that makes sense. But I'm curious, you have more experience than I do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I keep going. What I've been rattling around in my head, and I haven't quite figured out, but it'd be nice to put some coherent study and thought together across the alliance. Is if the alliance stays strong and we stay closer to a multilateral alliance than not, then we don't cede that terrain. And by that terrain, I mean the freedom of the Republic of South Korea, Japan, Australia, Taiwan, the United States, our allies, as we watch this authoritarian collusion going on. But if he's truly set on saying he only wants his own state, then the way he responds to our actions to defend ourselves is very different from one that's looking for an underhanded way to subordinate the South to him. And I think there's ways that we can, in the long term, influence our own strategies and change the perception over time of what North Korea thinks they want to get after that, at least long-term solution. Obviously, we'd always want peaceful reunification. We'd honestly always want a denuclearized peninsula, but neither one of those is in reach in the near or the midterm, I suspect. So sort of shaping our way to understand that, hey, if you want to be a defensive realist and have your own terrain control and not fear your population necessarily overthrowing you tomorrow, I think there's ways we can shape that by staying strong, but also affording him the opportunity to show that he's not about invading the South.
Yeah, and I think there are two worlds. One is you're in basically a deterrence relationship, and it's some sort of modus vivendi of some sort. But the other is, especially in a world where there are doubts about the credibility of the extended deterrence relationship, and South Korea, either does or does not try to get its own nuclear weapons. North KJU may perceive he has escalation dominance in that moment, and then you're in the Mir-Shimerian world, right? So I think we need to be prepared for that world, and we need to always think about that world. It is not obvious to me that he lives in a defensive realist world. I think that's right. And so you have this idea of shaping what he wants over time is important, but also not leaving vacuums that would be filled, right, by a more offensive realist sort of or aggressive kind of worldview.
Thank you. William King, go ahead. William,
you've-
go ahead. Go ahead.
You've highlighted numerous times on this extended nuclear deterrence the importance of trust and confidence, and publicly expressing that as well as privately. As we look toward what's going on in Ukraine and what Russia is doing in terms of threats of non-strategic nuclear weapons use and or threats against nuclear power plants, how are we, the U.S., reassuring our allies where we've extended the nuclear deterrent umbrella, saying that we're willing to cover them when it sort of seems like Russia is sort of, I'd like to call it the crying wolf. At some point, people stop listening, and the scare of the wolf is no longer the scare, and how they're using that nuclear threat as a way of numbing the public from these potential use of smaller scale nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I think in some ways the numbing is intentional, so that there's a little bit of we start pricing it in. I think, a lot of this has become public in Bob Woodward's book and David Sanger's book about the September-October 22 scare. And I lived through that, low level, everyone, the principals were dealing with it primarily. But the idea that it's all saber rattling, I think, isn't true. I think that was a real moment, and deterrence worked. I think what you saw was the U.S. government mobilize to, bring not just, partners and allies of the U.S., but also Russia, right? China played, I don't know. And I think Bob Woodward has this line, try to get China to put pressure on Russia too. I have no idea what was actually said, to not employ nuclear weapons in any scale, any form, anywhere. And you saw a lot of, at the time, it must have been sort of, because there was sort of this parade of don't do it. The president had this op-ed in the Washington Post, I think it was, any use of nuclear weapons by Russia on any scale, anywhere, would be met with severe consequences. And the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin, had a phone call with his counterpart, which got reproduced, I think, in the Bob Woodward book, right? Like, I'm the most powerful, quoting Secretary Austin, I'm the secretary of the most powerful, I lead the most powerful military in the history of the earth. I don't make threats, right? Essentially, I make promises. And it seemed to have worked. And so I think in Europe, there's been a lot of unity in NATO, which has been sort of a good deterrent. And I think at the critical moments, we've been able, partly because, it goes back to something very fundamental. We have 80 years, 75 years of a deterrence relationship and vocabulary, rules of the road with the Soviet Union and Russia. We know what it looks like when they roar. They know what it looks like when we roar. They know it's routine, and they know our baseline. They know what deviation from baseline is. And what we saw was deviation from baseline. And so that's something we don't have with North Korea. More importantly, I think it's something we don't have with China. We don't know what our baselines are with each other. They don't know ours, and we don't know theirs, because they're evolving theirs, both China and North Korea, because they're just in the middle of these sprints. Whereas with Russia, we know what baseline looks like, and they know when our BTFs are coming up, and yeah, they scramble, but we know they're going to scramble, and we know that's routine. And the media will sometimes pick up on an unsafe intercept or something like that, but that happens all the time. They know that something coming out of Vandenberg is a routine test. But with China and North Korea, we don't know what that baseline is, and we're establishing it, which is why these moments now are so crucial with both North Korea and China, because we are just establishing that informal communication. China won't do formal communication. North Korea won't do formal communication, but we do have this form. North Korea testing, that's communication. China doing this ICBM test in the Pacific, that's communication. But they had the wherewithal to know that we would pick up that's not baseline, and they told us, they pre-notified. So I'm not, I think I lost track of the question, except to say that, we're working out the deterrence communication with China and North Korea. We have the assurance communication in Europe worked out too. We have forward deployed capability. We have, DCA partners. All of that is integrated. Everybody knows what routine looks like. We are developing that in South Korea and Japan right now, and Australia. And so we're having to build that plane while it's flying already. And we're a little late to the game because I think China and North Korea sprinted in unanticipated ways. We priced in the Soviet nuclear program, and we had 80 years to develop it. Although I would say the 50s, we were probably building the plane while we're flying it also with Russia and with the Soviet Union. So we've done this before, but no one's alive to remember how we did it in the 1950s. So now we're doing it with the Indo-Pacific partners, and the assurance piece of it. I mean, my takeaway is, the deterrence piece of this is like 5%. It's almost easy, but the assurance part is 95%. Like the 95% of the effort goes to making sure the assurance piece of it is robust and credible and assuring to our ally capitals. In a lot of ways, deterring our adversaries is the easier part of the equation.
Yeah, I think you've connected it right, the assurance side of the house. And I think they're watching very closely how we and our NATO allies react to Russia's threats in Europe. And that has tremendous implications for how we understand the messaging from China and North Korea. So thank you.
Thank you, William. Young-Wan Yun, are you ready? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very succinct explanation. And I think the issue of some South Korean people wishing to develop their own nuclear weapons is closely related to their feeling of insecurity and uncertainty about Trump administration's policy. So I would appreciate it much if you could elaborate a little more about what will be happening after January 20th on this specific issue of extended nuclear deterrence. They say that there are three groups of people inside Republican Party, primacist and prioritizers and restrainers. Each group may have different views on this specific issue. And what do you think will happen in coming months and years?
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, I don't want to speculate, but I think, one piece of evidence is that, we've had 4 years of Trump already. And, this will be a different Trump administration because he comes in with 4 years of experience under his belt. But I think, the personnel that are populating the administration so far, I'm not sure it's clear a lot of them have very different views about sort of the alliances and extended deterrence and proliferation. But I think the most important thing will be what President Trump's views are on this. And we saw what these were last time. I don't think he likes nuclear proliferation. I think, the alliance more than survived the first Trump administration. President Trump has a very clear worldview on allies, which is he just wants the allies to contribute more than he thinks that they're currently contributing. I will note that that's not unique to Trump. It's bipartisan. The Democrats, the Obama administration, the Biden administration, we all want the allies to contribute more. Our style is a little different, right? So rather than saying it on Twitter, the Biden administration, in my view, at least from my vantage point, was, to work quietly and privately with allies to see how they could contribute, to get them to contribute in ways that they wanted to, and in ways that they could, that were beneficial for their security, but more importantly, from an American perspective, from our security as well. So we would provide ideas about how they could contribute. And we wanted them, NATO spending targets went up during the Biden administration. South Korea contributed a lot to the extended deterrence relationship. Japan contributed a tremendous amount to the extended deterrence relationship. And so, the Biden administration did it in a more, I think, quiet and diplomatic way. But substantively, I think the President Trump wants to do it more. He just has a different style, a negotiating style. But I think this time South Korea will be better prepared for it because they've experienced it once before. I personally don't think that President Trump would support South Korean independent nuclearization. I think President Biden and President Trump may not agree on many things, but I think they agree on one thing, which is they both view nuclear weapons as an existential threat. and neither wants nuclear weapons to spread to other countries. And I think both have said, if you listen to President Trump's statements on this very closely, I think it comes through crystal clear. They disagree on climate change, but they agree on nuclear weapons. And I think both have a view that they oppose the horizontal spread of nuclear weapons, both to adversaries, but also to allies. And so I think that's an important point about the continuity between these two presidents, who couldn't be more different in many, many ways. But on this issue, I actually think they share a common, and they share it in different ways, but they both view nuclear weapons, I think, as existential threats. And, in fact, President Trump did a podcast. I'm not sure if anybody saw this because it's publicly available. It's on Twitter. He did a podcast during the campaign where he talked about a moment in his previous administration where he's really talking about the arms control, trilateral arms control between Russia, China, and the US. He mistakenly referred to it as like, get rid of all their nuclear weapons. But you could see that it's something he's very passionate about. He was very, very passionate about about arms control. And I think it would extend to allies too, that, I don't think there would be a lot of support from the White House for South Korea to get its own nuclear weapons. I may be mistaken. I'm speculating. But based on what he said in the past, it is clear to me that President Trump does not want to see more nuclear weapons. And he would support arms control if we have willing partners. He's very happy to build strength if we have to, though. Like, I think that is something that's very clear. But if they're willing to come to the table, he'd negotiate a deal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vipin. Sang-Ho Song, go ahead. Sang-Ho, go ahead.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Professor Narang. Assuming that South Korea should not go for fully nuclear armament, what about the idea of redeploying tactical nuclear weapons from the United States once we used to keep them there?
Why? So here's my question. Anybody ask that question? Why? What problem are you trying to solve?
Well, my question is, as an effort to increase augmentation of extended deterrent, and it's increasing more credibility to North Koreans, without which extended deterrent does not work.
I don't think nukes on Penn actually makes extended deterrence more credible. I think it makes it more vulnerable because those targets are going to be ripe for preemption by North Korea. What we rely on now is essentially standoff capability to deter North Korea, and that's the geography of the peninsula. So, the argument is made that we have forward deployed nuclear weapons in NATO. Yeah, NATO is a land mass that abuts Russia. North Korea and peninsula is primarily a maritime environment. So we have SSBN capability patrolling in the open seas. And, I joked when the USS Kentucky pulled into Busan, I was very fortunate to be there, in that historic moment. First time US Ohio class SSBN pulled in 40 years, K2, 40 years, I think it was. I remarked, it's nice we have visible rotations and we committed to this strategic asset rotation. But an SSBN in port is useless. It's very vulnerable and it can't fire its tridents in port. SSBN is best suited when you can't see it at all, when it's invisible in the oceans patrolling and it's lurking out there. That's the best deterrent. In terms of visible rotations, one of the best things we did do was land a B-52 on Penn, because landing a B-52 on Penn is very hard. Reinforced concrete, length of runways, width of runways, all of that. Actually, that showed more credible extended deterrence than anything about putting nukes back on Penn are. But land-based deployments don't solve any deterrence or assurance problem, because we have standoff capability with the Ohio class SSBN. And when we get a slick amend, because we're going to get a slick amend in the next couple of years, I imagine. And that's mandated by Congress. The Biden administration was going to, the Department of Defense said we're going to do it. A slick amend is a standoff capability. You're better off against North Korean targets having Los Angeles or Virginia class SSNs, really Los Angeles class, I think, with nuclear tipped tomahawks off Penn rather than on Penn. Because the challenges of managing and having survivable assets on Penn against a nuclear North Korea, I think, is more is not worth the effort. It doesn't add to our deterrent because we have a very robust standoff deterrent. When we have a slick amendment, we'll have regional deterrent capability. We also have LRSO and ALCOMs already as sort of regional deterrence capabilities. And then your Ohio class SSBNs are your primary capability, in the Pacific. And so I'm just not sure what problem nukes on Penn solves, but it creates a huge headache because now you have to manage these weapons in a very known location that is going to be the first thing that's hit in a conflict. So I don't oppose nukes on Penn for any religious reason. I oppose it because it doesn't actually help deterrence or assurance.
Thank you.
Thank you for good answer.
Sang-ho, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. My question is, in your book on nuclear posture, there are 3 nuclear postures that you laid out. One is a catalytic strategy, and the other is assured escalation, and the last one is a asymmetric escalation. So do you have a conclusion of your own to define North Korea's nuclear doctrine?
Yeah, asymmetric escalation. Now it's asymmetric escalation. No question. Asymmetric escalation, 100%.
So like that involves preemption strikes and first use doctrine,
Possibly.
right? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jung-soo, go ahead.
Easiest question of the day, Sanko. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Within last month, Russia filed a missile. It was a hypersonic missile without nuclear into Ukraine in response to United States striking.
I don't think it was hypersonic. The Rubej is it was an intermediate or depending on the range, but a ballistic missile used in war with conventional pack. Yeah.
Yes. Does that change the equation in terms of nuclear deterrence? Because Russia is saying, "Hey, we don't have to have the nuclear war. We have this capacity." And that could cause a lot of impact.
I think it's not really a nuclear question. I think that is, since the dawn of nuclear weapons, there have been efforts. There's always been, an effort to find space for escalation without triggering a nuclear response, right? And I think this is one of many ways that Russia has sought to do that, right? I mean, after the October 22 episode, I mean, I think, I don't take off the table that Russia might use non-strategic nuclear weapons. But after that, there was sort of, you can imagine, well, the next logical step is, well, what else do we have that can sort of have a sort of a signaling effect or, a real effect on the battlefield without using non-strategic nuclear weapons. It was only a matter of time, I think, before instead of using 10 or 15 Kinzhals, they decided to use one Rubej with, the multiple reentry vehicles, conventional reentry vehicles. And so, I think that is what nuclear deterrence forces states to do, is find these spaces where they can have sort of escalate without triggering a nuclear response. And that's how I view that. And I think it's possible we might start seeing more sort of conventional strategic capabilities, the typical strategic capabilities like ICBMs and RBMs typically in the Russian inventory were primarily for nuclear. Now they're going dual use for everything. So we're seeing this move to more dual use. And I think it's primarily to escape, sort of the dilemmas of nuclear deterrence, right? But that's age old, right? Schelling talked about that in the 1950s and 60s.
Thank you. Hee-jae Chung, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Narang. My name is Hee-jae Chung. I'm an undergrad student at Azusa Pacific University. So Jung Sung-jang, the director of the Unification Strategy Research Division at the Sejong Institute in South Korea, argues that South Korea has sufficient justification to withdraw from the NPT. According to Article 10, Paragraph 1 of the NPT, a country has the right to withdraw from the treaty in case of a national emergency. Therefore, he claims that the argument that South Korea would face immediate sanctions upon withdrawal is groundless. He also points out that North Korea was sanctioned.
Wait, hold on. But the U.S. legislation is independent of that, right? So U.S. legislation applied to states that weren't even party to the NPT. So withdrawal does not necessarily allow South Korea to escape potential sanctions from European partners in the U.S. in the event of withdrawal, right? So the the Atomic Energy Act would apply whether you're in the NPT or not. I believe. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that it could easily be interpreted that way.
Okay. Yeah. So my question was about how do you think about the argument?
Yeah, I think it's wrong. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's ultimately political. If the international community supports South Korea getting nuclear weapons in contravention of its NPT or former NPT obligations, it may face sanctions. If it doesn't, if it supports it, like, you know, if the U.S. or the Europeans wink and nod the way the U.S. did with Pakistan in the 1980s, it won't. So we made exceptions in the past. The question is whether South Korea would get that. I would not take for granted that South Korea would get a blanket exception that wouldn't hurt the economy, though, right? And you know, that's a dangerous game for any president to play, right? Even in a world where you got a wink and a nod from the U.S., if you didn't get a wink and a nod from the Europeans, that is a big export market loss. The EU, the United Kingdom, be significant consequences for the South Korean economy.
Thank you. Contestant, are you ready?
Yes, thank you
Yes,
very
go
much.
ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Tae Shin-kwon, and I used to be Minister of Government Policy Coordination from 2009 2010, and I used to be regular member of National Security Ministerial meeting after Cheongnam incidents in Korea. And I joined this meeting many times, and I heard from James Clapper, former director of NIS, and then he says he admits U.S. policies against the North Korean nuclear issue has failed. So he said America need to recognize North Korea as nuclear power. And from there, they can have further talks not to sell it to Middle Eastern country. So it concerns me a lot. And the reason why Korean War happened, partly because of former Secretary of State in United States, Atchison drew line excluding Korea. And there is a rumor that President Trump is trying to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And then he said, he boasted many times, he is the only person who can talk with North Korea, the leader Kim Jong-un. And he can do kind of a small deal. And then the kind of gesture of the bombing Yongbyon, and then reduce the sanction. Then he can have a peace prize. So we are not 100% sure about U.S. The foreign policy. It can be changed depending upon time. So it concerns me, as the Minister Yoon pointed out. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the question is. I mean, we'll have to see. Every administration has the right to its own policy review. I will note that, you know, North Korea was a challenge identified and recognized by 5 successive U.S. presidents: Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and now Trump, right? So we'll have 5 in a return to Trump having to manage the North Korean situation. And is it a policy failure? I mean, if it is, it's a failure of 5 successive administrations. But North Korea is, you know, it's not a problem to be solved. It's a problem to be managed, right? And so the Biden administration policy review was denuclearization was the end goal. It recognized that there may be waypoints that are meaningful along the way, but that, you know, it's important to be clear-eyed about the threat, how to manage the threat. We double down on the alliance as to present a unified front to Kim Jong-un, but we also said that we'd be open to dialogue without preconditions, and that was similar to the previous President Trump, and I think will be similar to the next Trump administration. I don't think it is helpful to talk about accepting North Korea as a nuclear weapons power. I don't think the U.S. will accept North Korea as a nuclear weapons power, but the fact is it currently has nuclear weapons. Our policy, the Biden administration policy, was to, you know, promote or seek denuclearization, but understood that, you know, as you sought denuclearization as the end goal, you still had to deter North Korea, and if possible, you might do arms control along the way, on the pathway to denuclearization. So I think we're open to all of that. That said, the Trump administration will have to do a fresh policy review on North Korea. The problem, I think the problem we managed the problem better in the last 4 years because the alliance is stronger, right? So we have the NCG. The NCG is a real opportunity to really strengthen the alliance and help strengthen the management of the North Korea problem. As and when North Korea picks up the phone and is ready to talk, fine. I'm sure President Biden would have been there. President Trump will be there. But that doesn't mean that you don't continue to strengthen the alliance. And so our focus was on strengthening the alliance. And, I think I'm very proud of the whole team, some of whom are on this call, who worked to do that. And so it's multifaceted, it's complicated. It's not as simple as, North Korea is going to one day wake up and give up its nuclear weapons. But no one is blind to the reality of the magnitude and the intensity of the challenge we face, which is why we work so hard. I had the privilege of managing all of our extended deterrence relationships, 34 formal allies. And, I probably spent 50% of my time on South Korea. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of time. And I think we made a lot of time.
Thank you very much. But I still remember very well that President Trump met the Kim Jong-un, Singapore and Hanoi without getting any the promise.
But they weren't delusional about
Trump
it.
is the president of the strongest country in the world, and then he met Kim Jong-un, the worst, the criminal country in the world, without getting any concession. So he may do it again.
I'll say two things. One, you have to talk to your adversaries. President Biden and President Trump both agreed to that. Adhere to that principle. In fact, you have to talk to your adversaries more. Then number two, no one was delusional about Hanoi. Everybody knew both sides walked away without anything, right? There was no. It's not like we deluded ourselves into thinking that we walked away in North Korea. Kim Jong-un gave the keys to the nuclear kingdom. Nobody thought he did that. So at least we knew where we were. I actually don't think there's any harm in. I wrote this, and maybe made some enemies in my own Democratic Party. Look, President Trump tried something revolutionary. Nothing else was working. So he met with Kim Jong-un at Singapore. It set up Hanoi. And at Hanoi, it all fell apart. But nobody, he took the risk. And the risk, it could have paid off. It didn't. Okay. But he took the risk. We were in no worse position after Hanoi than we were prior to Singapore, basically prior. So gave it a shot and it didn't work out. But nobody lied to themselves to say that it worked. And so then the after Hanoi, the Trump administration approached North Korea essentially the same way the Biden administration did. But then the Biden administration chose to double down on the alliance. And that, I think, was a big change between the Biden administration and the Trump administration.
Well,
thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, time is up. Let's give Professor Narang a big round of applause.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
you. A lot of fun.
Vipin, that's a great session.
Thank you.
We'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.